Welcome to this conversation about AI and threat intelligence. I'm Christopher Ahlberg. I'm the co-founder of Record Future.
I'm Levi Gundert. I head up threat intel at Record Future.
And I'm Staffan Truvé. I'm the CTO and also the co-founder of Record Future.
Excellent. Welcome. So we're going to have a fun and interesting conversation, I think, here today about sort of how AI and threat intelligence are changing. And I think it's fair to say that it is changing. We sort of live in a world where over the last, probably by now, 3 years, AI is sort of, it feels like it's changing everything. We'll try to talk about that today, but we'll also try to sort of figure out if are there constants, things that are not changing. But so I thought I'd just start off by asking the two of you, do you think that intelligence is changing as AI is coming along, or is it really just the same?
I'm going to jump on this one, Staffan, first, and I'm going to say yes and no. I think the bottom line is in our industry, so many times you hear people talk about skate to where the puck is going. And I think in some ways it's very hard to know where the puck is going because you sit down with AI, especially in the last 3 or 4 months, and you start building and you just walk away from your computer and you come back. And many of the data sort of orchestration problems have been done and fixed and solved. So you think about what are the second order implications now? And so in that regard, the velocity piece, yes. But then fundamentally, the need for intelligence has probably become even more dire. It's really becoming a bigger part of the stack, and it has to become a bigger part of that stack because of that same velocity. So I'd say yes and no.
I would say it's definitely changing. I think one of the reasons is things are becoming faster and faster. And I think we've always been saying that intelligence is the only way you can be proactive rather than reactive. Of course, as the clock speed goes up, it becomes increasingly important to try to stay even a little bit ahead. And I think intelligence is necessary to do that.
Right. And we'll try to work to decompose that today and try to understand where that is. I did think it was interesting when JP Morgan put out their sort of guidelines for cybersecurity in an AI age. And it was a great blog. I think it's still on their website. And most of the baseline sort of guidance was do great cybersecurity. It was not like this new sort of AI blah, blah, blah type of stuff. It was really do great cybersecurity. But at the same time, the clock speed point, I think, is real. So we've always had this discussion for a long time here at Record Future and in our industry writ large, that is defend everything this job, or is the job knowing where the bad guys are going to hit first? Is that sort of fundamental thing changing with AI, or does it remain the same?
I think the defend everything very much stays the same. You know this, but I heard this the other day, a CISO saying the same mantra about you don't have to run faster than the bear, you just have to run faster than the guy next to you. And that's just like fundamentally not true anymore. That is just absolutely not true. And I think if you've been in security for any length of time, you know that is not true. In this AI era that we find ourselves in, the speed at which adversaries can now move, both with the frontier models, but also just sort of open source models running locally with no guardrails, there's all kinds of things that can happen there. And so for a long time, it's been an asymmetric problem where the adversary only has to get in once, right? And you have to defend everything. And I think AI is this great opportunity to kind of level the playing field, but there's all kinds of constraints that businesses are still working through, and it hasn't become realized yet. But fundamentally, you still have to defend the house, but you have to do it at a different velocity and different speed now. And so there's all kinds of challenges that come with that. But there's great opportunities in that as well.
Maybe one thing to add to that is with the bear analogy. The difference is now with AI, the attackers will be automating much more. So maybe the modern analogy is that there are no multiple bears. So it doesn't matter. There's going to be one bear for everyone, so to speak.
No, I think that's the point. And I think we'll come back and talk about the machine speed or the threat landscape changing at machine speed, which is just very hard for a human to sort of parse out and say, I'm going to go at piece A, piece B, piece C, because by the time you've gotten to C, something will have happened to your network. Now, I think all of you would agree that we still haven't really seen what these AI-like attacks are going to be like. I was on a panel last week in London. I was saying that we haven't seen this yet. We might have seen some trivial sort of AI attacks, but we can smell what it's coming to. Or would you guys agree with that? Or do you think we've already seen the full brunt of what this is going to look like?
I would say, we came up a while back with this model, the AI malware maturity model, where we try to sort of categorize different levels. Level 3 is essentially when people use AI to write malware. We've seen that. Level 4 is when you're seeing attacks where Their AI does part of the orchestration. I think the Anthropic thing, which came out late last year, was probably the first documented example of that. But level 5, which essentially we define it as a fully autonomous AI-enabled attack, I don't think anyone has seen that yet. Would you agree?
No, I totally agree. There's a lot of a runway still, and you know that adversaries are doing R&D right now with the latest and greatest models to determine how to move faster, but also how to be clever. I mean, this attack, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, there's been a couple supply chain attacks, but this latest one was really clever. And obviously, the headline was that a bunch of GitHub repos have been popped. But of course, it was a digital supply chain attack where I think initially credentials were used to get into a package. And that led to downstream machines being compromised when an update got pushed out for that package. But the incredibly clever thing about it is once it was on tens of thousands of developers' machines, it used the LLM on that machine to find AWS keys, to find SSH keys, to find all the keys to all the locks. And then it double encrypted all that data and pushed it out to a public GitHub repo. Just so clever. EDR never fired on it. It took them many, many hours to catch up. And so I think those types of clever attacks, you're going to see a lot more of that. And as defenders, you think, wow, it all looked normal. The LLM, the activity to GitHub. And so you have them just using more of the tools on the machine now. So I think there's a lot more to come in terms of that R&D.
Does this mean, are we going to see machines being much more locked down? We've obviously been working, even if it's just think about the security work we do internally at Recorded Future, a lot of that is just to remove the capabilities of our computers, if you speak plain language. But will that take you down a path where you just have to sort of remove so much more to get away from the unforeseen?
I think it's really difficult. And you two know this better than anyone. You started this great company, and Recorded Future has been just synonymous with innovation, right? So obviously you have to balance this, because if you say, look, we're just going to lock it down 5 ways to Sunday, and you crush innovation, right? And you can't move quick enough, then you're fundamentally handicapping the business. And so obviously you have to figure out where you want to manage the risk and where the business is happy to manage that risk. But I don't think you want to kill innovation. And hopefully Staffan agrees with me that you're going to have to build some agentic workflows to combat all that R&D and those clever attacks. I don't think you can just say, we're going to continue to lock it down, because you're just going to kill the business.
I think one thing we might come to, and it's kind of funny because that's something I was working on close to 30 years ago, to do more, let's call it situation-based right granting. Mm-hmm. So for example, if I'm at a certain location at a certain time, maybe I'm allowed to do some things on my machine, or me or my agent is allowed to do something. In another situation, I have another set of things I'm allowed to do.
It could be a zero trust sort of version. If I'm on my regular IP address, I get to do certain things. But if I'm on another IP address, all kinds of different things that's good. I like that. So 2 different areas. One is how AI can be used to combat AI if you want. And the other one is how intelligence can be used in all of this. Will AI ultimately be at the benefit of the defender or the attacker?
I really think it depends on how businesses manage the trade-offs here. Because if you give people room to innovate and you articulate the guardrails well, then they will come up with some great solutions, and they will build some great solutions. But you have to really be smart about how you build guardrails and how you articulate them to the workforce.
I think when we say AI, we should be thinking broader than LLMs. Thinking things back to what we were just talking about here. I mean, if we can use AI to do better, for example, anomaly detection, you can see that someone is doing a behavior which is widely or even slightly different from the normal behavior, to detect those kind of things as well. I think it's on the defender side, we're able to do that. But I think it's going to be an arms race for quite some time. At any given point in time, depending on who's more creative in using the new technology, one side or the other will have the upper hand.
When you put it that way, the scary part is that we know it's pretty much for sure that there's a bunch of guys or whatever in the equivalent in sort of SVR lab or GRU lab in Russia trying to think about nothing else but how do I take advantage of that? And then some super creative guys who are quote unquote cyber criminals somewhere who are just as creative as they come. So no, it's going to be in for a ride for sure. Now, what's the role of intelligence in this to enable AIs to do a better job or to inform us about AI? Does that change, or is it sort of the same that it's always been?
I think many of the use cases are going to stay the same, but they really become more urgent. And obviously building a lot of this becomes easier orchestration just on sort of the data layer. And that's great because it allows everyone to move faster. But use cases are going to stay the same. External attack surface, security operations, vulnerability management, prioritizing. So many of these use cases and workflows, they take on a new level of urgency. Again, because of the speed component, everyone is trying to figure out what the new SLA is for priority patching. It's got to be sub 24 hours now. It's a whole new world.
All right. So if we now believe that we live in this world where the threat landscape is moving at machine speed, does that change our philosophy around what can be automated or not?
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about these capabilities is literally anything can be automated. I've been using for the last 3-4 months. It's mind-blowing what can be automated and how fast it can be automated. And I think there's a lot of comfort in that. Every time there's a major breach, it happens on a Friday afternoon or it happens on a Saturday morning where you've got a dearth of human resources in the office to take care of it. And now you can have agents that are constantly monitoring, constantly combating. But I think you really do have to put in the time to get comfortable with an agent making a decision and taking an action, right? And a lot of companies are struggling with that right now. But I think we know that's the future. It's really going to be how fast you can move to that future in terms of building confidence and building comfort in, we understand the workflows, we how the agents operate, how they're trained. We've watched them, we've monitored them for a while, and we're comfortable with them making these decisions and taking actions on a Friday night. That's going to be a massive game changer.
You obviously run security here at Recorded Future too, Levi. And would you be confident to have an AI shut down an isolated machine, shut down credentials? You feel like we're at that point now?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm 100% there yet, but I think the more you interact with it, the more you work with it, the more you can observe it over time, you do start to build that comfortability, right? It's like the first time you get into a self-driving car. I don't think anyone's initially super comfortable with it, but after you do it a couple of times, you build some confidence in that. And I think we're all going to have to get there. We're all going to have to get there because it's an asymmetric problem until we do.
So I think one thing when it comes to trust in AI and agents is we have to be reasonable in the complexity of the systems we build. Because we know that LLMs are probabilistic machines, and it's fine maybe to have an agent which uses one, but if you start building huge networks of agents, it's going to be very, very hard to have trust in what kind of behavior they will show as a swarm. So when it comes to critical things, I think we need to keep reasonable complexity. Otherwise, I wouldn't trust it.
So if we stay focused on the part of the job that is yours, Levi, on the information security part or the cyber department, what's going to be the role of human approvals here? What's the critical level of human approval for, say, a CISO or a head of cyber operations as we see this going forward?
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, you're right. You're going to have a human in the loop for a while. And hopefully that just becomes very minimal sort of decision points on all of the articulation's been built around an incident. All the telemetry has been gathered. Everything's been enriched. The agent wants to take an action. Maybe they want to isolate a machine on the network. Maybe they want to revoke credentials. And it comes to you over Signal or Slack or whatever it is to hit approve. And I think we're probably going to be in that paradigm for a while, but even that situation is a huge improvement, right, over where we are today. Completely removing a human out of the loop, probably going to take a little bit longer, but I think even that near-term future is a huge improvement.
Yeah, and it might happen like if an organization that sees a multi-orchestrated attack when they come at the endpoints, they come at the firewalls, they come at the call center in multimodality sort of thing, might have theoretical problems with automation. Once you've seen that sort of attack, I think those consternations are probably been quickly out of the window, just like what we see. We don't see Ukraine sort of debating much about automation at the forefront of the battlefield. It's like,
no, I was just going to say that. I think it's going to depend a lot, of course, what kind of operation. If you're, in, let's say, as you say, in a battlefield situation, or if you're running a nuclear power plant, you'll have one set of criteria for what you're allowed and willing to automate. If you're just doing sort of plain office work, so to speak, you'll have maybe.
Yeah, I would actually argue that if you run a big e-commerce site or you run a big e-retailer, and you have people again a multi-tier sort of attack that comes at your firewalls, your endpoints, they're messing with your call center, they're coming at you in all these different things at the same time, and you have a big human in the loop policy and you realize that you just got taken to the cleaners, you're going to change that policy pretty quickly after being exposed to it. So that would probably happen faster than we think. It's at least my guess. So in that, if you're going to automate with trust, and obviously between the three of us believe that intelligence is a core component of that, minimally to just enrich my decisions and make sure that I can make good decisions. But how does a CISO really know that he's dealing with or she is dealing with automation grade intelligence?
I think automation grade is a little bit subjective because there's a spectrum. I think there's, to the earlier point, I think orchestration was a really hard problem before. You had to sit down and figure out, how to use the third-party third-party API and Python libraries, and it was just a massive headache. And all of that's been abstracted away. The orchestration layer is now automatic. So the nice thing, to your point, Christopher, is it really does give you a lot more time and resources to figure out what the quality of signal is and what the strength of the data is behind the intelligence. And again, I think it really depends on your workflow, but I think you want to be discerning in terms of digging into where does this originate from and how do I ensure that I have the highest quality sources, and plural sources, creating and producing and delivering that intelligence.
Yeah, and I've sort of built the baseline for that if I want, sort of at the time of peace, so that this is not something I start doing when I'm in that horrific situation. I've started early on and got a baseline. So now maybe I'll ask you about
that. Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, so I mean, one thing I really appreciate is, when you talk to customers and they've actually tried to measure this. They go out and then say that you compared you to 2 other vendors. 80% of the time you're faster than they are. You have better false positive rate and so forth. So I think even though you can't be sure that that's going to be persistent over time, but still trying to, if you have multiple vendors, try to get those metrics. And it's the only way you can say that maybe it's not automation grade, but at least it's the best I can get from what I have available.
But also I would say take what you just described and then take Levi's point on seeing what this looks like when it's happening in the wild, to see what sort of decisions am I making and what works out, what doesn't work out, and be willing to sort of take it there. Now, if we assume here in the future that we're going to sort of have the bad guys, whoever they are, nation states or criminals or hacktivists and so on, they're going to use automation, they're going to use AI to do attacks. We know that's going to happen. And so in that case, and then the defender have a certain amount of resources of AI, where that resources are measured in tokens or whatever they're measured in. Who comes out on top of that if you try to think about it as this sort of balancing act? And what's the role of intelligence in changing that equation?
I would say that a very important role here is intelligence as your input to how you prioritize the use of those resources. We've done some very nice work recently here looking at, let's assume with the latest LLM models that you're going to be just getting this flood of newly discovered vulnerabilities. And everyone knows that a very small percentage of those are really a concern, but understanding which ones to prioritize is a great example where you can add intelligence to understand which one are likely to be weaponized and which of those will actually be likely to target you. So I think intelligence as a means of setting the priorities is quite important.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that. I think in terms of how you build these things and how you pay for them, everyone's going to be asking questions. CFOs everywhere are starting to ask the questions on where is all this money going in terms of the tokens? What is the ROI on all this token spend? A lot of it's going to be, what do we need frontier models for, and what can we build locally and use open source models for, and how do we build more cost-efficient solutions? So that, I think, is going to be a massive topic for every CFO here very soon. And then the second part on building these things, it's really about the outcome. And I'm a huge fan of being able to build systems that allow you to understand your risk. So bringing the inside and the outside pictures together and understand your risk. And AI is going to help you build these things in a much more cogent way. And I think that's the other part of this is if you don't have the external threat picture, it's very hard to understand what your risk is. It's very hard to validate your controls. It's very hard to articulate why you want to invest in a new control or why you want to, I think even more importantly, time the investment in a control. So there's this whole operational layer that intelligence is going to achieve and doesn't achieve better operational security outcomes every day. But then you get to sort of the executive layer and it's how do we make better decisions? Well, you can't do that without great threat intelligence to be able to understand across all your security workflows where we're going to invest and why we're going to invest now.
I would add the 2 following points to how we think about what the impact of AI will be in this. And clearly we're worried, and you're alluding to this, Staffan, that we'll see this flood of vulnerabilities coming out of these models, and be it Mythos, being GPT-5.5 or whatever model it is, but that's going out source code. And it's probably largely an open source problem to begin with. And that's sort of the number one there. But on the other hand, if I contrast that with the amount of code that is now being produced, and somebody nicely said it here recently to me, that the amount of dark code that is being produced that never has had human eyes on it. And I don't think it matters whether this is the largest bank in the country, the largest tech company, or the smallest startup, or the salt mining operation. The amount of dark code that is out there, that is the real problem we have in front of us. And now this resource allocation becomes really important. So I know where I can sort of apply my security resources, because there's going to be a lot of surface area. We might see a tenfold sort of expansion of surface area here in a blink. And going to be an exciting time. So let me ask another question. If we look as an industry here, and that could be the intelligence industry if you want, or more generally the cybersecurity industry, what do we believe today that's going to look pretty naive 5 years out?
So I think actually one thing is, Levi said it before, and I say it all the time, this thing about the necessity of having a human in the loop. I think we're not going to say that it's a natural thing 5 years from now. I think, AI will evolve to the point that we will say that you have to have an agent in the loop, essentially. There will still be human oversight of some kind, but to believe that we need to have humans taking part in decisions, I think it's going to probably in 5 years' time be seen as quite exotic.
I think you're 100% right. And it's the same thing that we're seeing on the military battlefield right now. We don't hear a word of like human in the loop in Ukraine. And it's going to be the same thing there. And the security industry is going to learn. There'll be some nasty lessons from where people sort of were waiting for that human to show up, and very bad things happen. So I think that's a great point.
I totally agree. That's a great point. The other one I'll say, it's not as controversial, but there's going to be a lot of building of on-prem systems. There's been this whole movement to the cloud over the last decade for everything. And we're using frontier models to answer Google-like questions. And I think there's going to be this movement, migration back, building some of these things on-prem with open source models. And a lot of the workflows that get done are going to be cheaper and more cost-effective. There's going to be more control over them with those open source models. And there's all kinds of things wrapped up in that too, just around data privacy and compliance, everything else. But I think the spending is so out of control right now. I think 5 years from now, it'll look a little bit silly.
So finally, in this world where security and AI is still trying to find its equilibrium and we don't really know exactly where it's going to land, what does a team with great intelligence see that everyone else misses?
One aspect of this is, we talked about before, speed. They see the same thing, but they see it faster. I think, time to detection is going to be a key differentiator going forward as clock cycle increases.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. On top of that, at a high level, understanding the adversary and the adversary space, right? Whether it's about profit seeking, whether it's about state-sponsored objectives, I think having the insight into how actors are evolving, how they're doing R&D, does allow you to think about your controls in a different way, just from a category perspective. And I think that's one of the fundamental value propositions when it comes to intelligence is hopefully you're not being surprised because you are in the middle of the adversary space and you're much better prepared for what's coming down the pipe.
I would agree. And at some level, it's interesting. We might feel like these LLMs have in themselves incredible knowledge. Now, remember that they got cutoffs when they were trained, and maybe those cutoffs becomes narrower and more recent instead of being cut off as of middle of June last year or something like that. Maybe that window gets shorter, but as part of this clock speed moving up and things moving faster, the intel that they have taking action upon has to be even more real time. And we've always talked about Recorded Future as being real time intelligence. And I think that real time aspect is going to become so much more important of this. It might seem enticing to have the LLM work in using the data that it knows, but remember that it might be 8 months old. And having these agents having a real time feed is going to be instrumental. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I think that part is not to be underestimated.
I agree. And I mean, and of course, what we're seeing now is that the LLMs or the services are getting the ability to search, but again, they are searching the open web. So they will have sort of, as you said, historic knowledge, and they will have the sort of simplest level of open source intelligence. They will not have the technical information. They will not have access to the places necessary to understand what the adversaries are doing.
And I think it's going to be, even if the answer is in plain sight, it will be search-like, where whatever they stumbled upon, as opposed to a comprehensive set of intelligence that can be used to combat the most sharpest threats coming at you.
I agree. This is, to me, the whole idea of intelligence is that it's data-driven. You start from your raw collections and you refine it, and finally you take decisions. You don't go the other way around, starting with a question and going backwards trying to find it, because that's going to be too late.
I totally agree. And we had talked about this earlier, Christopher, but there's all kinds of reasons that your LLM is not going to want to deploy agents into, call it dark web, right? Or into bad neighborhoods, right, of the internet. And there's all kinds of data that is not going to be accessible to your LLM, regardless of how good the model is. Underlying data and the diversity of that data becomes really, really important to that whole process.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fun discussions.
That was great. Thanks.